They didn't lose you, they lost control, and that's the one thing they never recover from. Because what they thought was a simple betrayal was actually the beginning of their collapse, and they don't even see it yet. You have to understand something most people miss. A narcissist doesn't walk away thinking they've destroyed you. They walk away believing they've upgraded, optimized, outplayed. In their mind, you are just a chapter they outgrew. But here's the twist. They don't measure damage the way normal people do. They measure control, influence, reaction. If you're starting to see this pattern clearly, stay with me, because what comes next will completely change how you see power in these situations. A narcissist doesn't build relationships the way most people do. What looks like connection on the surface is actually a system of control underneath. Every interaction, every moment of attention, every emotional exchange serves a purpose: to maintain influence, to stay dominant, to ensure that the dynamic always tilts in their favor. It's not about mutual understanding or shared depth. It's about positioning. They observe what triggers reactions, what creates attachment, what keeps someone engaged, and then they repeat those patterns with precision. Connection for them is unpredictable. It requires vulnerability, and vulnerability introduces risk. Control, on the other hand, is measurable. It's safer. If they can predict how you'll respond, if they can anticipate your emotions before you even express them, they feel powerful. That power becomes their version of stability. It replaces genuine intimacy with something that feels structured and manageable. This is why they invest so heavily in learning your patterns early on. They notice what makes you feel valued, what makes you anxious, what earns your trust. Then they mirror, amplify, or withdraw those elements strategically. When you feel close to them, it's often because they've allowed that closeness to happen in a controlled way. When you feel distance, it's not random either. It's a calculated shift designed to pull you back in. Over time, this creates an illusion of connection. You feel seen, but only in the ways they've decided to see you. You feel understood, but only within the boundaries they've set. The moment anything threatens that structure, independence, detachment, unpredictability, they don't lean in to repair it. They tighten control. And when control starts slipping, when reactions become weaker or disappear altogether, something inside them destabilizes. Because without control, they don't know how to sustain the dynamic. They don't know how to relate without managing the outcome. What remains is a gap they were never equipped to handle, one where connection would normally exist, but for them, it was never truly built in the first place. Betrayal, in the mind of a narcissist, is rarely impulsive or purely emotional. It's often a calculated decision, shaped by what they believe will give them the greatest advantage in that moment. They assess situations in terms of gain and loss, not loyalty or integrity. If they perceive that stepping away, replacing someone, or breaking trust will elevate their status, feed their ego, or give them more control, they justify it internally without hesitation. To them, it isn't betrayal in the traditional sense, it's optimization. They assume that after the act, they will still retain influence, that the person they hurt will remain emotionally hooked, confused, or seeking answers. This expectation is critical because it allows them to believe they can have both: freedom to act selfishly while still keeping a psychological grip on the other person. They rely on emotional aftershocks like pain, anger, or longing because all of these responses still keep them relevant in your mind. What they fail to account for is the long-term psychological backlash when that expected reaction doesn't come. When instead of chasing, questioning, or reacting, there is silence or detachment, the entire strategy begins to collapse. The absence of response creates a void they didn't predict, and that void becomes deeply unsettling. Their action was supposed to secure power, but now it feels like it has erased their presence entirely. This is where the backfire begins. Without emotional feedback, they lose the ability to measure their impact. They can't tell if they've won because there's no visible reaction confirming it. Doubt starts to creep in, not necessarily as guilt, but as confusion. They begin to revisit their own decision, trying to understand why the outcome doesn't match their expectation. At the same time, their need to restore control intensifies. They may attempt to re-enter, provoke, or recreate the connection in subtle ways, but it feels different now. The dynamic they once managed so easily no longer responds the same way. What was meant to strengthen their position has instead weakened it, leaving them in a state where they are chasing clarity they can no longer force into existence. At the core of a narcissist's personality is an identity that isn't internally anchored. It isn't built from stable self-awareness, values, or genuine self-acceptance. Instead, it's constructed from external inputs, how others respond to them, how much admiration they receive, how much influence they can exert in any given environment. Their sense of self is constantly being assembled and reinforced from the outside, which means it requires continuous maintenance. This is why validation becomes essential, not optional. Attention, praise, even fear or envy. These are all forms of feedback that confirm their existence in the way they want to perceive it. Without that feedback loop, their identity starts to feel unstable. It's not that they suddenly become self-reflective or grounded, it's that they feel a kind of internal emptiness they don't know how to process. Instead of looking inward, they instinctively seek new sources to restore that external reinforcement. Because of this, their confidence often appears strong, but is actually highly conditional. It depends on how well they are being received in the moment. When things are going their way, when they are admired, desired, or in control, they seem unshakable. But the moment that external validation weakens or disappears, cracks begin to form. Small disruptions can feel disproportionately threatening because they challenge the very structure holding their identity together. This fragility also explains why they react strongly to perceived rejection or indifference. It's not just about losing a person, it's about losing a source of identity reinforcement. When someone who once provided consistent attention suddenly becomes distant or unresponsive, it creates a gap that isn't easily replaced. Even if they find new people, the transition isn't seamless because each source of validation is tied to a specific dynamic they've carefully shaped. Over time, this creates a cycle where they are constantly managing impressions, seeking reactions, and adjusting behavior to maintain their self-image. But since the foundation is external, it never fully stabilizes, leaving them dependent on others to sustain a version of themselves they cannot hold on their own. Attention is not just something a narcissist enjoys. It's the core resource that sustains their sense of control. Every reaction you give, whether positive or negative, acts as confirmation that they still have influence over your emotional state. When you respond, explain, defend, or even get upset, it tells them they can still reach you, still shape your experience, still exist in your mental space. That ongoing access becomes their leverage. When attention is consistent, they feel stable. They can predict your responses, anticipate your behavior, and adjust their actions to maintain dominance in the dynamic. Even conflict works in their favor because it keeps the connection active. Silence, however, is different. Silence removes the feedback they rely on to navigate the situation. It cuts off the signals they use to measure control. The moment you withdraw attention in a genuine way, not as a tactic to provoke, but as a complete shift in focus, you disrupt their entire system. There's no data for them to work with, no emotional cues to interpret, no reaction to feed off. What once felt predictable becomes uncertain, and that uncertainty creates discomfort they are not equipped to manage. Without your attention, their perceived power starts to fade. They can't confirm whether they still matter to you, and that ambiguity becomes unsettling. It forces them into a position they avoid at all costs, one where they are no longer directing the outcome. Instead of influencing your behavior, they are left guessing, which reverses the dynamic they depend on. This shift doesn't just weaken their control externally, it affects them internally as well. The absence of attention removes a key source of validation, which ties directly into how they maintain their identity. As that source disappears, so does a part of the structure they rely on to feel secure. They may try to regain that attention through subtle or indirect means, testing boundaries, creating situations, or reappearing unexpectedly, but it rarely restores the same level of control. Because once attention is withdrawn with clarity and consistency, the dynamic changes in a way that cannot be easily reversed. A narcissist tends to underestimate anything that isn't loud, visible, or emotionally reactive. Their entire framework for understanding strength is built around what they can see and measure: dominance in conversation, control over outcomes, the ability to provoke or influence someone's behavior. Because of that, they often associate silence with weakness, calmness with submission, and detachment with defeat. If there's no visible resistance, they assume there's no real power behind it. What they fail to recognize is that silent strength operates on a completely different level. It doesn't seek validation, doesn't announce itself, and doesn't engage in unnecessary conflict. It's rooted in self-control and clarity, not reaction. When someone chooses not to respond, not to chase, not to explain themselves, it removes the entire arena where the narcissist feels most capable. There's no argument to win, no emotion to manipulate, no behavior to predict. This creates a blind spot. They expect that pressure will eventually produce a reaction, because that's how their past experiences have reinforced their beliefs. They've learned that if they push enough, through withdrawal, mixed signals, or subtle provocations, most people will eventually respond. That response is what reestablishes their sense of control. But when they encounter someone who doesn't follow that pattern, who remains steady and unresponsive in a grounded way, it disrupts their expectations. Emotional detachment in this context is not indifference born from avoidance. It's a deliberate shift in focus. It means that their actions no longer dictate your internal state. Without that connection, their usual strategies lose effectiveness. They can't escalate tension if there's nothing feeding it. They can't create confusion if there's no engagement. Over time, this lack of response forces them into unfamiliar territory. They're no longer leading the dynamic, they're reacting to an absence. And because they don't understand the source of that absence, they may misinterpret it at first. But eventually, it becomes clear that what they dismissed as weakness was actually a form of control they cannot access or replicate. What most people misunderstand is the idea of revenge in situations like this. They imagine it as something active, proving a point, exposing the other person, making them feel the same pain. But that kind of response still keeps you tied to the dynamic. It signals that they still have influence over your emotions, your focus, your decisions. Even if it feels justified, it continues the loop they depend on. Indifference, on the other hand, operates differently. It isn't about suppressing feelings or pretending nothing happened. It's about redirecting your energy entirely away from them and into yourself. That shift breaks the connection at its core, because it removes the emotional investment that once gave them access to you. When you stop measuring your worth through their actions or their perception, their role in your life becomes irrelevant. Self-reconstruction is the deeper layer of this process. It's not just moving on externally, it's rebuilding internally in a way that makes the past dynamic impossible to repeat. You start identifying the patterns that kept you engaged, the moments where you tolerated confusion or imbalance, and you replace those with clarity and boundaries. This isn't reactive, it's intentional. It creates a version of you that no longer fits into the structure they once controlled. From their perspective, this is difficult to comprehend. They expect lingering attachment, occasional reactions, or at least some sign that they still occupy space in your mind. When none of that appears, it creates a disconnect. They can't engage with something that isn't responding, and they can't control something that isn't available. Over time, this absence becomes more powerful than any direct action. It doesn't challenge them openly, but it removes the stage they rely on. Without that stage, their usual strategies have nowhere to land, and the dynamic dissolves in a way that leaves no clear path for them to re-enter or influence again. In the end, this was never about who walked away first or who appeared stronger in the moment. It was about what remained when the noise stopped. Control, attention, and reaction were the foundations that once held everything together. And the moment those were removed, the entire structure lost its balance. What looked like a simple betrayal turned into something far more significant. It exposed the difference between external power and internal strength. One depends on others to survive, constantly seeking validation, constantly needing control. The other stands on its own, quiet, steady, and unaffected by the need to prove anything. There's no need for confrontation, no need for explanation, no need to win anything outwardly, because the moment you become unreachable in a grounded, composed way, the dynamic ends on its own, not through force, but through absence. And that's the part they never expected. Not the silence itself, but the strength behind it.